These are the most forbidden vintage photos, unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. You can see funny shots, women eating berries to the accordion, men laughing over glasses of wine. But the shocking fact is that they were all employees of Auschwitz, and the horrors of the camp were just a kilometer away. This is a reconstruction of the plutonium demon core experiment at Los Alamos in 1946. The scientists manually reduced the neutron reflectors by holding the upper hemisphere with a screwdriver. A slipped instrument led to the fatal irradiation of Louis Slotin and put an end to manual experiments with nuclear materials. In 2009, 26-year-old John Jones got stuck in the narrow passage of the Nutty Putty Cave in Utah, ending up upside down in a crack only 43 centimeters wide. Rescuers tried to pull him out using a system of pulleys and ropes, but after more than 24 hours of effort, the equipment could not stand it, and he slipped back inside. John was never rescued, and the cave itself was soon permanently closed and sealed as his grave. Chicago, 1903. The picture shows a fire in the Iroquois Theater, which was considered fireproof. When the stage curtains caught fire, the extinguishing system proved useless, and the emergency exits were blocked or incomprehensible to the audience. Hundreds of people were trapped inside in a panic, and the tragedy claimed the lives of more than 600 people, becoming the largest theater disaster in the history of the United States. In this photo, two brothers pose by the fireplace, as if it were an ordinary family picture. But a few hours later, a tragedy occurred. One of them was involved in a conspiracy against his own family. His mother and brother became victims, and his father miraculously survived, making this story one of the most shocking family dramas in the United States. In front of you is the top of K2, the second highest peak on the planet and one of the most dangerous. One of the biggest disasters in the history of mountaineering took place here at the Bottleneck site in August 2008. A series of ice slides and rope breaks doomed several groups. Every fourth person who reaches the top of K2 never comes back down, and this mountain has gained a reputation as a killer of climbers. In the photo, Myra Hindley with her dog on Saddleworth Marshes. Later, the police established that she and her accomplice took such pictures intentionally, leaving hints at the places of disappearance. These photos have become evidence in one of the UK's most gruesome investigations. The details of this story are too heavy. If you want, you can Google it further yourself. Don Ritchie lived near the Gap Rocks in Australia, known as the site of tragic accidents. Over the decades, he has stopped more than 160 people just by inviting them for a cup of tea and talking in a friendly way. His kindness and attention became a salvation for many, and today he is called the Angel from the Cliff. In 1978, a hostage-taking took place in Melbourne when an armed man held about 30 people. It all ended unexpectedly. His mother burst into the hall, hit him with a bag, and ordered him to stop nonsense. Despite the weapon, he surrendered immediately, and the story went down in the chronicles as one of the most unusual endings of the crisis. During the tsunami in Japan in 2011, Miki Endo, an employee of the alert service, remained at her post and continued to send warnings to people. Thanks to her work, thousands of residents managed to evacuate and escape. Her feat has been called one of the most heroic examples of dedication during a disaster. On April 29, 1945, the prisoners at the Dachau concentration camp turned the situation against their former guards. This rare image shows how the released prisoners clashed with a guard while American soldiers were watching what was happening. This day went down in history as the moment of reckoning and the end of the Dachau camp. Zubaydah Hassan from Afghanistan suffered a serious accident in 2001, after which doctors did not believe she would be able to recover. But a series of complex operations changed her fate. The girl went through an incredible transformation and became a symbol of strength and survival. In 1981, the fear that had held residents for decades disappeared in the American town of Skidmore. Ken McElroy, a local bully known for his brutality, suddenly turned up dead in broad daylight in front of dozens of witnesses. No one has ever been brought to justice, and this mystery still remains unsolved. In 1978, 15-year-old Mary Vincent hitched a ride in California, and this decision changed her life forever. After the attack, she miraculously managed to get out of the canyon where she found herself and, bleeding from fatigue, walked almost 5 kilometers until she reached the road. Her incredible tenacity allowed her to survive where the chance was almost zero, and later, Mary helped the police identify the attacker, making her name a symbol of strength and resilience. In 1903, 2 different prisoners entered Leavenworth Prison almost simultaneously, both named William West. They were not related, but they looked exactly the same, which caused confusion in the records. This case has become one of the main reasons to introduce fingerprints as a mandatory identification method around the world. After uncovering his dark deeds, Marcel Petit managed to escape by growing a beard and posing as Captain Valerie. Under this name, he even joined the police and was given the task to look for himself. It was only a few months later that he was exposed and identified. Nuremberg, 1946. An ominous shadow of a noose appears on the wall of the tower during the nightly hearings on military trials. This frame has become a symbol of reckoning and the end of one of the darkest pages of the 20th century. University of Pennsylvania, circa 1915. A basement room, rows of strange figures completely wrapped in cloth and suspended from metal hooks. They were actually training dummies to train doctors, but the picture looks like it was taken on the set of a horror movie. Here is the Les Diableries series, created in France in the 1860s. These are stereoscopic photographs where scenes of hell and skeletons were made of plaster and illuminated so as to come to life in a 3-dimensional image. These creepy dioramas were popular in the salons of the 19th century and became one of the first examples of horror in 3D. A rare vintage photo, a child in a clown costume with a mask next to an unusual stroller with an umbrella and an animal on a leash. It looks scary and not at all like an ordinary photo from the past. It's a mystery to you. What could it be? Write your versions in the comments. An old photo found in the basement of the hospital. In front of the facade, there are nuns and one man in work clothes. Their faces are frozen without emotions, which gives the frame an alarming atmosphere. At the beginning of the 20th century, such orders controlled hospitals, and the question still remains what role these people really played behind the walls of such buildings. On February 13, 2017, 2 schoolgirls from Delphi, Indiana, went for a walk on the old railroad bridge. The last picture was posted on Snapchat at 2:07 p.m., showing Abigail Williams. A little later, a blurred figure of a man was recorded on the phone, who was only a few dozen meters behind. Even today, this frame remains a key piece of evidence in one of the most high-profile and mysterious cases in the United States. In 1981, a trial took place in West Germany that shocked the country. In the dock was a man who took the life of a 7-year-old girl. During the hearing, her mother, Marianne Bachmeier, pulled out a hidden pistol and opened fire right in the courtroom. In front of dozens of witnesses, she committed an act of revenge, which still causes disputes about the boundaries of justice. The rack is one of the most famous torture instruments of the Middle Ages. The man was chained by his arms and legs. Then the mechanism gradually stretched the body, dislocating joints and tearing ligaments. This tool has been used in Europe since antiquity and up to the 18th century to extract confessions and punishments. The photo shows a museum reconstruction of the device. In 1961, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, a student, was arrested in Jackson, Mississippi for participating in the civil rights movement. The authorities couldn't believe that the white girl was supporting the protesters and sent her for a mental health check. Actor Robert Englund, who played Freddy Krueger in the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street, once fell asleep on the set in full makeup. When he woke up and looked in the mirror, he did not immediately realize that he was seeing his own reflection, and he was scared. Chinese spy Shi Pei-pu has been posing as a woman for 2 decades. He deceived a French diplomat by convincing him of the existence of their child, and only years later, the deception was revealed. This incident went down in the history of intelligence as one of the most unusual examples of prolonged concealment. In the photo, a Soviet woman stands under the portraits of her 7 sons who died on the fronts of the Second World War. Such families were called multi-son victims of the war, and their tragedies were recorded for the archives of memory. In 1981, Disneyland found itself in court after a girl claimed that a character in a Winnie the Pooh costume had hit her and damaged her brain. The actor in the guise of Winnie the Pooh fought the charges by wearing a suit in court and proving that he could not physically strike. This case has become one of the strangest judicial precedents in the history of entertainment. Rosemary Kennedy, the beloved sister of John and Robert Kennedy, underwent a dangerous experimental treatment at the age of 23, after which her life changed forever. She found herself isolated from society and spent decades in closed institutions. This story became one of the darkest pages of the Kennedy dynasty, which they tried to keep quiet about for a long time. During the filming of the movie Poltergeist, actress Jo Beth Williams starred in a pool scene where dozens of skeletons swam around her. Later, she found out that these were not dummies, but real human remains used to save the budget. This fact turned the film into a Hollywood legend and gave rise to rumors about its curse. Ed Kemper is a 2-meter-tall and 135-kilo inmate, nicknamed the Giant from California. In this rare photo, he poses with prison guards like an ordinary colleague. The contrast between his reputation and this mundane scene makes the picture one of the most eerie in the archives of American prisons. In the photo, a man is sitting just a few centimeters above a giant alligator turtle. She winters under a thin layer of ice, right under his feet. This ancient reptile weighs over 100 kilograms and has one of the most powerful jaws in the animal kingdom. In 1986, Christopher Thomas Knight killed his car in the wilderness of Maine and went into the woods. He lived there all alone for 27 years, without family, without friends, and with almost no contact with people. He was nicknamed the Hermit from North Pond, and this story has become one of the most striking in modern America. This 16th century object is known as the Pear of Horror. The metal case with petals was opened by a screw, turning it from a harmless fruit into a creepy mechanism. Today it is kept in museums as one of the most mysterious and terrifying symbols of the era of the witch hunt. In 1965, a man weighing 207 kilograms refused to eat for more than a year under medical supervision. He received only vitamins and minerals and lost 125 kilograms during this time. This experiment was a unique case in the history of medicine and is still being studied by doctors. In 1952, Kent released cigarettes with asbestos filters, touting them as cancer protection. Each breath brought asbestos fibers into the lungs instead of safety, creating an even greater threat. This marketing ploy has gone down in history as one of the most dangerous advertising deceptions of the 20th century. According to Robert L. Leahy, director of the American Institute of Cognitive Therapy, the average high school student today experiences the same level of anxiety as a psychiatric patient in the early 1950s. This shows how rapidly psychological stress has grown in modern society. In the photo, SeaWorld trainer Dawn Bronchot performs with a killer whale named Tilikum. A few minutes later, a tragedy occurred right in front of the audience, which called into question the entire marine show industry. This case has become one of the most high-profile turning points in the history of SeaWorld. The Spanish boot is a massive metal casing for the foot, into which wedges were inserted and hammered until completely compressed. It has been used since the 16th century as an interrogation tool designed for psychological and physical pressure. This technique is one of the darkest symbols of torture in the history of European law. On November 22, 1963, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in aboard Air Force One, while while Jacqueline Kennedy stood by in mourning. At that moment, Congressman Albert Thomas winked at the new president, and a photographer captured a scene that is still controversial. Timothy Treadwell lived side by side with wild bears in Alaska for more than a decade, filming their habits and telling the world about his mission. His story ended in tragedy in 2003, when he and his companion died during one of the observation seasons. Metal beds stand in rows in an abandoned ward in the middle of the 20th century, which once housed dozens of patients with tuberculosis and mental disorders. Such rooms were filled by patients confined to beds for weeks and months, while sanitary standards were minimal. The picture was taken in Seattle in 1912 during the Potlatch Parade, a massive urban celebration honoring the indigenous traditions of the Northwest Coast. Participants in rabbit costumes marched in a column through the city center, creating one of the most unusual sights of the early 20th century. A 1920 photograph captures the remains of an ancient fortification known as the Stairway to the Bastion, hidden in the dense thickets of West Africa. Stone steps led to the top of a defensive rampart erected to protect local settlements. Photo from 1905, New Orleans, early Mardi Gras. The masks were handmade, often from papier-mâché, and looked more sinister than festive. Hungary, 1935. A group of men in gas masks are undergoing civil defense training. At that time, the whole of Europe was preparing for possible gas attacks after the horrific experience of the First World War. California, 1953. A ward with iron lungs used for patients affected by polio and unable to breathe on their own. By the middle of the 20th century, tens of thousands of cases of the disease were recorded in the United States annually, and such rows of devices became a symbol of the fight against the epidemic until the introduction of the Jonas Salk vaccine in 1955. Expedition to Wrangel Island, 1921. Canadian Alan Crawford, 3 Americans and Inuit Ada Blackjack tried to colonize the island according to Villemor Stephenson's plan. Help never came. 3 men disappeared on the way, Lorne Knight died of scurvy, and only Blackjack managed to survive by learning to hunt and waiting for rescuers in 1923. In 1954, Norwegian singer Inger Jacobsen and her husband, Danish ventriloquist Jackie Bulow, posed with dolls that were part of his stage numbers. At that time, ventriloquism was at the peak of popularity, and Jacobsen soon became one of Norway's leading performers, representing the country at the Eurovision Song Contest in 1962. In the late 1960s, there was an unknown killer operating in Northern California who went down in history as the Zodiac. He confessed to dozens of crimes, although only a few have been officially confirmed. His special feature was encrypted messages with symbols and ridicule, which he sent to newspapers and the police. Despite extensive investigations and many versions, the identity of the Zodiac has not been established. On August 4th, 2020, one of the most powerful non-nuclear explosions in history occurred in the port of Beirut. About 2.7 thousand tons of ammonium nitrate were stored in hangar numbers 12, which ignited after the fire. The explosion claimed the lives of 181 people, injured thousands, and left hundreds of thousands of residents homeless. The picture shows firefighters trying to open the warehouse in the last minutes before the disaster. They all died doing their duty. The picture shows a female Malaysian spider of the genus Omothymus with a brood of cubs. These tree spiders live in the rainforests of Southeast Asia and are distinguished by their large size and nocturnal lifestyle. The female guards the offspring on the bark of the tree until the small spiders can independently settle in the surrounding area. A patient with schizophrenia on the left, before the lobotomy in May 1942 on the right, a few months after the operation. The procedure was then considered a treatment, but for most, it turned into serious consequences. Women accused of gossip, excessive talkativeness, or objectionable behavior were forced to wear a metal mask, a complex structure with sharp elements that blocked their mouths and prevented them from speaking. Often the masks had a pattern in the form of a long tongue, large ears, or animal faces, symbolizing the vices of the criminal. Some masks had bells on them to attract the attention of the public while putting the guilty party on display. Netherlands, 1963. Firefighters carry out a showcase mannequin from a building engulfed in fire. In severe frost, the water from the sleeves instantly froze and created a thick ice mask on the face. The frame captures the effect characteristic of winter fires, the complete icing of objects beyond recognition. USSR, 1932. Experimental balloon train by engineer Abakumov at the test site. The aerodynamic shape of the hull was supposed to allow reaching speeds of up to 300 km/h. The project was deemed too expensive and complex, and it remained in the form of a prototype.
In 1931, a racehorse named Bravo was officially moved into the hotel with its owner. Exceptions were made for animals of this level, as they cost a fortune. The rare frame reflects an era when champions were perceived almost as human beings.
In 1795, Napoleon established a 12,000 franc prize for a new way to preserve food for the army. The candy maker Nicholas Appert invented canning by hermetically sealing food in jars and boiling them, first describing the method in 1810. In 1813, the first canned food factory was opened in England using tin instead of glass. The picture was taken in Hungary in 1942. In the foreground, a man poses for the camera, and in the background, the figure of a girl without a face and arms is visible. The researchers note that the photo has no signs of retouching at that time. The photo was taken in 1959 and captures the figure of an unknown passenger in the back seat of a car. Experts have been studying the image for decades, and there are no signs of double exposure or retouching. In 1971, during an aerial survey of Costa Rica, a round-shaped anomalous object was captured. A study in the Journal of Scientific Exploration ruled out the possibility of double exposure or reflection. Scientists have concluded that the object cannot be explained by known phenomena and remains unidentified. In 1916, a circus elephant named Mary, who belonged to the Sparks World Famous Shows troupe, was executed by hanging in Irwin, Tennessee. The reason was her aggressive reaction to the inexperienced driver, which caused a public outcry. The case has become one of the most famous examples of animal cruelty in the history of American circuses. On October 31, 1952, the United States conducted the first hydrogen bomb test on Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The explosion was codenamed Ivy Mike and had a power of about 10.4 megatons in TNT equivalent. The explosion cloud rose tens of kilometers, and the island itself, where the installation was located, was completely vaporized. In 1984, an American LGM-118A Peacekeeper intercontinental missile was test-launched over Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The photo shows 8 warheads that separated from the rocket and entered the atmosphere along the trajectory to the targets. In 1929, at the Easter Parade in New York, a group of suffragists, commissioned by the advertiser Edward Bernays, defiantly smoked Lucky Strike cigarettes. The action was called Torches of Freedom, and it was organized on behalf of American Tobacco to break the taboo on female smoking in public places. In April 1968, thousands of people in Cairo reported seeing a glowing female figure above the Coptic Church of the Virgin Mary in the Zaytun area. Initially, eyewitnesses thought it was a woman about to jump from the roof, but soon crowds began to flock to the temple, claiming to see the Virgin. The phenomena continued regularly until 1971 and were documented by photographs and testimonies of believers. A horse named Lady Wonder, who lived in Virginia in the middle of the 20th century, became famous as psychic. Her owner taught her to press the letter keys with her nose, adding words. In 1952, the police asked the lady for help in finding the missing boy, and according to her tip, the body was indeed found near the specified place. The future father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, found himself at the center of a scandal in his youth. While studying in England, he planted an apple in his professor, into which he injected poison from the laboratory. The story goes that at the last moment, he changed his mind and took the fruit, but the incident still came to light. Oppenheimer was almost expelled from the university, and only the influence of his family helped hush up the case. In the 1st century AD, Heron of Alexandria invented the Eolipile, the first steam turbine. The sphere with tubes rotated under the pressure of the escaping steam, but contemporaries perceived it only as a toy. The potential for mechanics and transportation was not noticed then. At the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis, the marathon turned into a farce. American Frederick Lors reached the finish line first, but drove half the distance in a car. After being exposed, he was disqualified, and the victory went to Thomas Hicks, who was actually dragged to the finish line and supported with a mixture of brandy, egg whites, and strychnine. At the end of the 19th century in Paris, the body of an unknown teenage girl, nicknamed the Unknown from the Seine, was pulled out of the Seine. Her face turned out to be so calm and beautiful that the doctor took off his death mask, which became popular in Europe. Decades later, it was this face that was chosen for the Resusci Anne mannequin, on which millions of people learned how to perform artificial respiration. So, the drowned girl received the title of the most kissed in the world. In 1659, the Puritans of the Massachusetts colony banned Christmas, imposing a fine of 5 shillings. Back then, the holiday was not associated with family traditions, but with noisy feasting and drunkenness, which the Puritans considered pagan excesses. The ban was lifted only in 1681, but the dislike of Christmas persisted in New England for a long time. Houdini cheated death hundreds of times on stage, but died from a simple punch to the stomach. In 1926, a student punched him in the stomach several times, after which the artist's appendix ruptured. Ignoring the pain and doctors, Houdini continued to perform, but soon died of peritonitis on Halloween night. The Second World War gave rise to dozens of myths, and one of the most persistent is about a secret base in Antarctica. In 1938, Germany did send an expedition to explore the mainland and search for resources, but the base was never built. Instead, Captain Richard's team only mapped new territories, increasing the known area of Antarctica by 16%. In the 1950s, beavers in Idaho were parachuted from airplanes. Due to overpopulation, they were destroying the ecosystem, and the authorities found an unusual solution: to use army parachutes from the Second World War. So, 76 beavers were relocated to new places, and 75 of them survived safely. In 1917, the most powerful explosion before the era of atomic bombs occurred in Halifax, Canada. After the collision of the Mont Blanc ship, loaded with 2.5 thousand tons of explosives, about 2,000 people were killed, 9,000 more were injured, and thousands were left homeless. Telegraph operator Vincent Coleman managed to send the last message at the cost of his life, stopping a passenger train and saving hundreds of lives. In 1920, French President Paul Deschanel fell off the Orient Express in his pajamas and one slipper. He reached the nearest signal post and introduced himself. "I am the President of France," to which the attendant, deciding that in front of him was a madman, replied, "And I am the Emperor Napoleon." A little-known fact: Abraham Lincoln almost joined the infamous Donner Squad. His friend James F. Reed, one of the leaders of the expedition, personally invited Lincoln to go west in 1846. According to the memoirs of the Reed's daughter, Lincoln himself had half an intention: to go to California with a group that later became trapped and went to cannibalism. The greatest hoax of the Second World War. The British created Major William Martin. In fact, it was the corpse of a homeless man disguised in a Marine uniform with fake letters about the offensive in Greece and Sardinia. The Germans believed the ploy, and the Allies unexpectedly attacked Sicily, which accelerated the fall of Mussolini and Italy's withdrawal from the war. The future U.S. President Jimmy Carter personally participated in the elimination of the nuclear accident in Canada in 1952. He and his team went inside the reactor for 90 seconds to manually unscrew bolts and parts from the molten core. In a few runs, they collected the irradiated elements, receiving a dose of radiation 1,000 times higher than the modern norm. Carter later admitted that his urine remained radioactive for several months. On August 6, 1945, Hiroshima. The explosion of the atomic bomb was so powerful that a man sitting on the steps of the Sumitomo Bank, just 240 meters from the epicenter, evaporated instantly. His silhouette is forever imprinted on the stone in the form of the so-called shadow of death. This phenomenon arose due to the fact that intense radiation discolored the surface around, leaving a mark where the body was sitting. The first incendiary device appeared before matches. In 1823, the German chemist Johann Deberiner created the Deberiner lamp, which used hydrogen to ignite a fire. It was intended for lighting pipes and fireplaces. It wasn't until 1826 that the English chemist John Walker accidentally invented matches when a stick treated with chemicals ignited when rubbing against a fireplace. In 1914, Lawrence Sperry invented the autopilot and demonstrated it at competitions. 2 years later, during a flight with student Cynthia Polk, the device went off, and their plane crashed into the bay off Long Island. The couple was found naked, which the press called the beginning of the legend of the Mile High Club. In 1930, Clyde Barrow, tired of hard work in prison, convinced a cellmate to chop off 2 of his toes in the hope of making his sentence easier. However, he was soon released early anyway, after which he and Bonnie Parker began their infamous criminal journey. Charlie Chaplin once participated in a contest of self, doubles, and took only the 3rd place, and according to another version, even the 20th. The judges did not recognize him because in reality, the actor had blue eyes, which the audience could not see in silent black and white films. American serial killer John Wayne Gacy performed at children's parties in the 1970s in the guise of Pogo the Clown. He made his own costume and applied makeup, which hid his double life, a philanthropist and an animator on the one hand, and a criminal on the other. A rare frame of Chucky animatronics assembly, Cheese, made in an Orlando factory in the late 1970s. These mechanical dolls were used in the restaurant chain for children's shows, combining pizza and animated performances, which became a signature part of the brand. A mannequin of Jason Voorhees wearing a hockey mask is installed at the bottom of Crystal Lake in Minnesota. It was shipped there in 2013 as a kind of commemorative installation based on the movie Friday the 13th, and it remains a popular find among divers. In an abandoned school in Pripyat, located in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the floors are still strewn with gas masks. They were distributed to children and adults after the 1986 accident, but due to the rapid evacuation, they remained unused. The 19th century Central African lyre is made from a human skull, antelope horns, skin, veins, and hair. The unique instrument was used in ritual practice and is now preserved at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The skeleton of the extinct dodo bird, which lived on the island of Mauritius and disappeared in the 17th century due to hunting and imported animals, is kept in museums as a rare exhibit. These findings remain the only source for studying the appearance and biology of the species. An antique dental chair has been preserved in a cell at the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, which operated from 1829 to 1971. Today, the building is considered one of the most famous abandoned prisons in the United States and is popular as an object for paranormal researchers. John Wayne Gacy's shoes, which he wore portraying Pogo the Clown at children's parties in the 1970s, have been preserved as tangible evidence of his double life. This attribute has become part of the criminal history of the United States related to serial murders. Dennis Rader, known as the BTK serial killer, pictured with his daughter in 1993. At that time, he led an ordinary life and remained unnoticed by society, continuing to hide from justice. The famous bus that became Christopher McCandless's hideout was abandoned in the Alaskan wilderness and used by him for a living in 1992. In September of the same year, his body was found inside, which made this bus a symbol of the story later described in the book and the film Into the Wild. In January 1955, Charles Manson married 17-year-old Rosalie Willis, and this picture captures him as a groom. Just a few months later, he was arrested for car theft and sent to prison, where his young wife soon stopped visiting him. The so-called mask of shame has been used in Europe since the 16th century to publicly humiliate people who have committed minor offenses. It was worn in market squares, turning punishment into a means of ridicule and social pressure. In 1978, 18-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer was photographed at the graduation of Riviera High School in Butler, Ohio, with his classmate. This picture is considered a rare evidence of his life before a series of crimes committed years later. In the 1920s, the brothers Adolf and Rudolf Dassler founded a shoe company, but their union quickly turned into a feud. After the war, they finally broke up. Adolf created Adidas, and Rudolf created Puma. The conflict was so deep that it split their hometown, separating families and businesses on both sides of the river. The American Civil War ended in 1865, but its reverberations dragged on until 2020. The last recipient of a military pension was Irene Triplett, who was born in 1930 into the family of an 83-year-old veteran who had fought for both the Confederacy and the Union. After his death, she inherited payments that lasted more than 150 years after the end of the war. During World War II, Congressman Andrew May accidentally revealed a military secret to the Japanese. He told reporters that their depth charges could not reach American submarines. The Japanese immediately corrected the miscalculation, and soon dozens of submarines were destroyed. According to the Navy, the politician's talkativeness cost the lives of about 800 American sailors. On April 25, 1865, the steamer Sultana, designed for 346 passengers, set sail with more than 2,000 released prisoners of war. The overload caused a boiler explosion, and about 1,800 people died, making it the largest river disaster in U.S. history. On December 8, 1941, just 10 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese aircraft attacked American bases in the Philippines. Most of the U.S. Air Force was destroyed on the ground, and by April 1942, the Luzon garrison had surrendered. Captured American and Filipino soldiers ended up in captivity, where thousands died during the infamous Bataan Death March. While the world was on the verge of nuclear war during the Caribbean crisis, a sudden Sino-Indian war broke out in the Himalayas. On October 20th, 1962, China struck India, catching it unprepared, and thousands died in a month of fighting. The conflict ended with a sudden ceasefire, leaving only a shaky line of actual control instead of a border. The day after the sinking of the Titanic, American Harriet Quimby made history as the first woman to cross the English Channel, but almost no one noticed her feat. The world was paralyzed by the tragedy of the liner. Just a few weeks later, Quimby died in a plane crash, and her name became a ghost lost between two disasters. On April 16, 1947, the day after Jackie Robinson's debut, the French ship Grand Camp exploded in the port of Texas City with 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate. The explosion wiped out factories and city blocks, caused a tsunami, and killed up to 600 people, injuring thousands, becoming one of the worst disasters in the history of the United States. From 1934 to 1938, Cleveland lived in fear of the torso killer, whose victims were discovered in shocking and incomplete states across the city. The first was a woman whose remains surfaced in Lake Erie, followed by numerous unidentified men and women. Authorities even burned down the Kingsbury Run slum, trying to flush him out. But he was never caught. The identity of one of America's most terrifying killers remains an unsolved mystery. Before the advent of the phone, the word hello was almost never used as a greeting. It expressed surprise or attracted attention. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell suggested answering the phone with the word ahoy, but Thomas Edison insisted on hello. It was his version that gained a foothold, thanks to the first telephone directories, where the instructions were printed. When answering, say hello. Write your opinion about the video in the comments. Subscribe. I will be very grateful to you.